I met Jason on a humid summer evening in New York City. I was 26, freshly moved from a small Midwestern town, full of dreams and optimism. He was 31, a marketing executive with a sharp wit and a smile that could melt glaciers. We met at a friend's rooftop party, and from the moment our eyes locked, I felt like the universe had conspired to bring us together. Jason was everything I'd ever wanted: charming, ambitious, and endlessly supportive. He listened to my dreams of opening a boutique bakery, even offering to help me draft a business plan. We'd sit in his cozy apartment, planning our future over takeout and cheap wine. Life felt perfect, like one of those romantic movies where the girl finally finds her prince. But as our relationship deepened, so did my dreams. I started imagining a life together, a little house in Brooklyn, weekend trips to the Catskills, and maybe someday, a couple of kids running around. Jason seemed on board, or so I thought. We'd joke about baby names and argue over what colour to paint our imaginary kitchen. He always said, "one day," and I believed him, until the day I didn't. It started subtly. One night, as we watched a romantic comedy, the protagonist proposed in a grand, over-the-top gesture. I'd laughed, nudging Jason playfully. "Would you ever do something like that?" He'd smirked, avoiding my gaze. "I'm not really the big gesture type, but you'd propose someday, right?" I pressed, my tone light but my heart pounding. He hesitated, and that hesitation lingered in the air like a bad smell. "I mean, marriage isn't for everyone, you know." I laughed it off, brushing aside the creeping unease. Jason loved me. He'd come around, or so I told myself. Over the next year, the signs became harder to ignore. When my best friend Rachel got engaged, Jason's reaction was muted. "Good for them," he'd said, barely looking up from his phone. At weddings, he'd grumble about the expense or roll his eyes at the sappy speeches. And when I'd bring up our future, he'd change the subject or give vague, non-committal answers. I started to feel like a puzzle missing its final piece. We had love, passion, and companionship, but there was always a yet hanging over us. Yet he wouldn't talk about marriage. Yet he'd clam up whenever I mentioned the future. Yet he'd never introduced me to his parents. The tension between us grew like a hairline crack spreading across a mirror. And then everything shattered. It was our 3-year anniversary. I'd spent weeks planning a romantic evening, a candlelit dinner at home, his favourite dessert, and a heartfelt letter tucked into a gift box. Jason arrived late, looking frazzled and distracted. "Sorry," he mumbled, kissing my cheek. "Work's been crazy." We ate in near silence, my excitement dimming with every passing minute. When I handed him the gift, his face clouded with guilt. "I didn't get you anything," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just read the letter." He opened the envelope, scanning my carefully written words. My love for him, my dreams for our future, my hope that he'd be my partner for life. When he finished, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "This is beautiful," he said softly. But then he added the words that crushed me. "But I don't know if I can give you what you want." The room spun. "What do you mean?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I love you, but I've never been sure about marriage. It's just not something I see for myself." His words felt like a knife to the heart. 3 years of love, laughter, and shared dreams, reduced to uncertainty. I'd built my future around him, and now he was pulling the rug out from under me. I moved out 2 weeks later. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but staying felt like betraying myself. Jason begged me to reconsider, promising he'd think about it. But I knew his heart wasn't in it, and I couldn't spend my life waiting for someone to change their mind. The months that followed were brutal. I'd wake up in my tiny sublet apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I'd made a mistake. I missed Jason, his laugh, his touch, the way he'd sing off-key to make me smile. But I also missed the person I'd been before him, a woman with dreams and self-worth, not someone who settled for less than she deserved. Rachel was my rock during this time, dragging me out for wine nights and reminding me why I'd left. "You did the right thing," she'd say, her voice firm. "You're not asking for too much. You're asking for the right person." 6 months later, I ran into Jason at a coffee shop. He looked the same, handsome, polished, and utterly familiar. But something in me had shifted. We exchanged polite small talk, and then he said, "I've been thinking about you a lot." I smiled, feeling a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. "I've been thinking about me a lot too." Jason laughed, but I meant it. The time apart had taught me to prioritize my happiness, to stop compromising on the things that mattered most. I'd started taking baking classes and was even working on a business plan for my bakery. For the first time in years, I felt whole. As I walked away from Jason that day, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't the villain of my story. He was just someone who couldn't give me what I needed. And that was okay, because I'd finally learned to give it to myself. 2 years later, I opened my bakery, Sweet Dreams. It was a cozy little shop filled with the aroma of freshly baked pastries and the laughter of happy customers. On the wall behind the counter hung a small sign that read, "Choose yourself." Every day I'd look at that sign and remember the journey that brought me here. Jason had been a chapter in my story, but he wasn't the ending. I was, and for the first time, that felt like enough.